Well, hey, everybody, you guys ready to get started? Perfect. Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. But before I do that, I just want to say thank you to Meisha and Michael for making this happen. This is huge. I mean, the fact that we've had LGBT stuff happening all year round at CCAR is incredible. And I hope you guys I hope that you guys get as much out of it as I'm getting out of it. It has been an amazing experience. And my heart is just bursting from all of the attention and the love that the LGBT community is getting. So I hope that you guys are taking that in. Like, that's massive. And I just want to say thank you to you guys, right, for coming. I mean, like, it's incredible that you're here, and I think I've seen most of you like multiple times. So like, you guys are like amazing, and for continuing to come and continuing to talk about LGBT stuff and consider it and how it shows up for you in your recovery coaching practice. It definitely feeds my soul, and I hope that the work that we're doing is helping you. So today I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you guys can see the slides, because we've got a few slides, and we're going to do some cool little breakouts today. So let me make my thing work better. There we go. Okay, so I can only see a few of you when I've got my slides like this. But know that I'm looking at the ones of you that I can see, and I'm moving you guys around so that I can see more of you. And also, when you see me look this way, what you're actually seeing me do is look at the PowerPoint slides that you guys are seeing, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page, right? So I guess the first thing to do to start is, there's only a few of us. How about we just go ahead and like introduce ourselves 2 minutes or less? Are you guys down for that? Perfect. Who would like to get us started? Neither.
Well, I'll get the ball rolling. So I'm I'm Napier Wren. I'm an RCPF in England. We're one of the first with CLEASE. And we're just spreading recovery coaching and recovery and everything we possibly can that's positive to as many people as possible in the UK. And I'm really excited to be here because this is not my zone of expertise. I know very little, so I am just going to be a bit spongy and learn. And if I ask a stupid question, I'm apologizing now because I'm just trying to get educated. So yeah, so thank you for having me, and grateful this is happening.
Heck yeah. And also, no stupid questions. Who's next? 2 minutes or less.
Hey, I'm Patrick. I am a recovery coach in Connecticut and Delaware. I split my time between the two. And Johanna, I was part of the June session that we did for Pride too. So really wonderful to be here again. Right now, I'm doing recovery coaching sort of as a side gig while I focus on cancer recovery. But been going through a lot of chemo treatment, so I'm on medical leave from my work. But what I have done, I've been in recovery now for 13 years, I guess, and have gotten to work with clients, and what I find I continue to need. Obviously my experience as a gay man, sort of colors through the prism of working with LGBT in particular. But what I have found, and what I continue to sometimes struggle with, is working with the clients and being able to get them moving forward a little more. We keep getting to certain points at least with my clients, and then it's either 2 steps back and we start up again. And so I love these training sessions because I get to hear from other coaches too, and some of the examples that people use. I'm like, that's how they broke through on that. So it's really great to be here today, and I'm looking forward to it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. Love that story. All right. Who's next? 2 minutes or less. Margaret, did I see your hand go up? Awesome. Khalees, you're after her.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Just happy, Margaret Price here in Bronx, New York. I'm a facilitator of the CCAR curriculum and looking forward to learn some new things about the LGBT plus community today so that I can really expand my knowledge in that area. So thank you for offering this. It's really going to be very helpful.
Love that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Khalees and then Amber.
Hi, y'all. My name is Khalees. I am from Texas. I now live in England. I'm a recovery coach professional and facilitator. And as my mama mentioned, because my mom is Nita, we are spreading recovery coaching, which I think I manifested this 6 months ago because I said I wanted to spread recovery coaching in the UK like a wildfire, and now we're doing it. So I think I manifested this, but I'm just going to take a little bit of credit. But and then I just like learning. Honestly, I'm a learner. I show up. I've actually been to all of your trainings, Johanna, on LGBTQ. So yeah, and just how I can best support and do more and share, information with our community when they have questions and just passing it on. That's
I
it.
love that. Thank you. I'm so glad you keep coming back. So we've got Amber and then Chris and then Michael. Amber, please introduce yourself.
Hello, Amber Jones from Columbus, Ohio. I'm a linguistic care coordinator here and with Franklin County Public Health by way of the CDC. And we are tasked with building out a peer support program. So we just completed last week the recovery coach training, which we're still on fire and so excited to continue to learn, like Khalees said, just continue to digest as much information as possible. My colleague and I, Chris, were just talking about, I think last week, about how we need to be intentional about getting into the LGBT community. And so this was perfect timing. I literally just stumbled upon this like minutes ago and sent it to Chris. I don't know if he already had it, but I was like, hey, look, we need to do this. So I'm excited to be here and learn from everyone. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you. I love that. Chris and then Michael.
Hey, I'm Chris Hayes. I am one of the peer navigators here at Franklin County Public Health in Columbus, Ohio. Prior to getting in recovery 5 years ago, my whole adult life was LGBT media. So I own the gay paper for the Ohio and been very active. So it's nice to see my two worlds come together on one screen. So with that, I will pass.
Love that. Thanks, Chris. Michael.
Hi, my name is Michael Serrano. I'm a person in long-term recovery. For me, that means I haven't used a minor altering substance since October 1st. I just celebrated 8 years this past weekend. God, thank God, right? I am the Facilitated Development Coordinator for the CCAR training team. That means I work closely with facilitators throughout the country and over the pond as well. I had a question. Well, there's this young lady that just asked a question via email, which was interesting to me. And she said, hi, Michael, just wanted to offer some feedback. When writing LGBT, there are others not being mentioned within the community. I thought highly recommended changing to LGBT plus or LGBTQIA. Thanks. And I don't know how to answer that. So I just said, well, I hope you can join us and share your thoughts.
That's awesome. I think that's a great way to answer it, right? So like there's so many different ways to talk about the LGBT community, right? Like there's LGBTQIA plus, there is LGBTQ plus, there's LGBTQIA plus, there's the gay and trans communities, there is lesbian communities. Like you can like the easiest, simplest way to talk about the LGBT community is sexual orientation and gender identity minorities. And I mean, every single person that is part of the community, we speak about ourselves in ways that are specific to us.
Thank
so
you.
I love that question.
Yeah, I do too. And I hope she's able to come.
Yeah, that'd
Can
be
you
great.
just say what you said again, Johanna? The easiest way to talk about it is sexual identity, and what was the other phrase?
Yeah, so sexual identity and gender identity minorities. Yeah, the world and as a whole is developed for, right? And I mean, think about developed. Developed just means like the rules and the structures that are in place, they are in place for heterosexual individuals who are cisgender. In other words, their gender identity and their physicality match. And so, you know, like that makes anybody who is not straight or cisgender, someone who belongs to, who is included under the umbrella of sexual orientation and gender identity minorities. I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I hope she does come, or they come, whomever. Iwa, did I say your name right? Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself in 2 minutes or less?
Hi, everybody. So my name is Eva. It's Polish, but good try. To share on a personal level, this Friday, I will be 8 months alcohol free. So I appreciate everybody sharing their journeys. Congratulations. I actually just started a job about 3 weeks ago at St. Vincent de Paul Mission of Bristol. So we're an emergency homeless shelter in Connecticut in the US. And we are actually opening up a resource center for the unhoused community here in Bristol, where we will provide showers, laundry, assistance with getting disability, Social Security, anything and everything that someone would need help with. So I'm going to be an admin assistant and the reception person. So I've already done a lot of research and educated myself in my own personal life in as many areas as I can. So I wanted to come on here today to learn more about the LGBTQ plus community, so that I can be a better ally to people in my personal life and when I'm at work. So I just appreciate everyone being here, and I look forward to learning. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome, Eva. All right. Well, let us go ahead and, oh, I guess I should introduce myself, right? So I know many of you in the room, but for those of you guys that don't know me, my name is Johanna Dolan. I am an RCPF here in the United States, and we have trained people across the pond and all throughout the country, as well as in several other countries. So that is pretty amazing. The things that we've been blessed to be able to do as being part of the CCAR family. And I am I'm passionate about this work because it impacts me personally. I'm both in recovery and I am a member of the LGBT community. And so, as well as a couple of other things that, you know, are, I guess you might want to know too, is I've been doing LGBT trainings since 2015. So that's 7 years. I have been a member of many different organizations. I am a member of many different organizations that focuses on both recovery and LGBT concerns. I have trained people from entire police departments to entire medical departments, and I geek out on this stuff. I've trained with Blue Cross Blue Shield. I've trained with CCAR, of course. And so one of the things I've learned is that we can do our level best at creating brave spaces like this one, so people can learn, so that they can go out and create safer environments for everybody. And so that is part of the reason why I do this work. And I want to make sure that recovery is truly available for everyone that we interact with. So yeah, there we go. That's me in a nutshell. And when I'm not doing that, I'm out hiking or playing with my nieces. So happy LGBT History Month, everybody. Let's kick it off with like talking about what we're going to talk about. So when we speak about recovery and the LGBT community, we're often starting from a place of lack. In other words, we're talking about how prevalent addiction is in the community, or how we don't often get our needs met in recovery settings. And while both of those things are true, it's also very true that the LGBT community has made major contributions to recovery. So whether queer folks were out of the closet or were in it, the work that's being done by the LGBT community, it's been influential in removing stigma, not just for the LGBT community, but also for the recovery community. We've been educating people about the disease of addiction, advocating for treatment, and opening recovery communities to minority groups. And we've also been part of the modern recovery movement since the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we helped to start the AA Grapevine. We petitioned for special interest gay AA groups long before it was even safe to do so. So the fact that like I'm here and Chris is here and Patrick is here and we are acknowledging who we are, those are radical acts that at one point would most certainly have landed us either in jail or in a mental health facility, or possibly abused in some way, shape, or form, or murdered. So the fact that we're able to do that today is an indicator of how far we've had to go, how far we've come, and how far we can go. So what we're going to talk about today is like our actual agenda is we're going to walk through a thought experiment. We're going to give you a little bit of information about the LGBT backstory. We're going to talk about queer pioneers, and we're going to talk about how inclusion got started, in the recovery space. So one thing actually before I move to that is you are going to hear me refer to AA and 12-step communities, not because we're trying to be exclusive, rather because they are the oldest recovery communities still in existence today, right? Like there are multiple old recovery societies that no longer exist, like the Washingtonians and several others, right? The temperance movements, but AA and the 12-step communities, those are the ones that are still in existence. They still have a very strong, lots of people use them. And so they have a well-documented history. And so you're going to hear me talk about them. Please know that we've been, and also you're going to hear me talk about the other big picture things that we've done that we are all, every single person in this room are all beneficiaries of. So know that you're going to hear about 12 steps a lot today. So let me ask you guys, why do you think it's important to understand LGBTQIA plus contributions in the recovery community? What you got, Nisa?
I just think, in this community and many other minority communities, there's some real unsung heroes that nobody really knows about, and I just always think about there are people who make huge impacts and just nobody ever knows. And so, and then also kind of for me, like if I'm talking to somebody, I want to be able to give hopeful, relevant examples of people who have walked the path before and include the struggles, it's not all, but, that gives hope because definitely in some spaces, we're way behind on this. And I can't reference the right points, but hopefully like by being in trainings like this, I might just get that golden nugget that in a conversation in 6 months I'm having, I can go, oh, let me tell you what I learned on this quickie 1-hour CCAR training that, look up this person, see what they did. You could be a change maker too. But I just don't even have those points of reference. So, yeah.
Yeah, right on. Thank you for that. So Khalees and then Emily. What do you got, Khalees?
Oh, well, I think my mom just took everything I was going to say, like mother, like daughter. I was just going to say that, one, like being able to say, look at these people, because we need to feel like we belong. We need to see people who have similar traits of us that are in line with us. And then we're like, oh, I can do this too. It gives hope. Yeah. You know what? I'm not going to repeat myself. Repeat my mom, because she said everything I was going to say.
That's fantastic. Thank you. Emily, what do you got?
Sorry about that. I was still
Oh, no
muted.
worries.
My first thought on this was more of representation. Was really what I kind of the first place that my mind went on this was, seeing people like themselves making accomplishments or, achieving those things.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. In fact, you just led us into the thought experiment. But before we do that, Chris put into the chat so that LGBT plus people feel welcome and included in the recovery movement, recovery spaces like AA and NA. Yeah. And so to expand it even further, right? Like at the end, we're going to ask you, like, what do you know? What are some other resources that you know, right? Because I'm not a member of SMART, but I certainly know about it and I read about it and I engage with people that are members of SMART, right? So for instance, if you know about a resource or a pioneer or someone who's doing really amazing stuff with SMART, like share that information with us, because then we can add to what we're doing, right? And maybe it's Refuge or Wellbriety or something like that. So like know that it's so big, right? Like the recovery community, there's so many pathways, and being able to see ourselves in all of the pathways really does matter. So like you guys are right on point, and being able to direct someone, right? Like, I think about, I was doing this LGBT group, at a treatment center not that long ago, and someone was like, but I've never actually, to Emily's point, right? I've never actually seen someone that's like me, and so everybody's telling me like, God doesn't love me and my life's gonna be so hard, or they're like going the exact opposite direction. It's all rainbows and butterflies and I don't know what to believe. And it's like, okay, well, let's take it a step back, and what do you want? And also, there's lots of people throughout history, right? Like Alexander the Great, and so many others that we could probably sit here and talk about and name, like being able to pull those people up and say, this person, right? Alan Turing, like all of these people that offered tremendous things and had, both the ups and the downs of living with stigma, like being able to direct people to them and connect people to each other is huge. So having said that, like, let's go talk about our thought experiment. So imagine, we're going to pop you guys into, we got 13 people in here, so 12. So let's pop people into groups of 3. No, groups of 4.
So you want four breakout rooms, right? Or you want 3 breakout rooms?
3 breakout rooms with 4 people in them.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So what we want you to, while he's doing that, thank you so much. And like, let's give 10 minutes because we're here until 2:30, right? So we want you guys to have a good conversation and then bring what you have into the group, right? So what I want you to think about is what Emily was talking about, right? Like, imagine if you as yourself, not as anybody else, but you as yourself, did not see people that looked like you, talked like you, acted like you, dated like you in the spaces that you are a part of, right? So you don't see them at your church, you don't see them at your synagogue or your university or your Minecraft group. I don't know why I'm stuck on Minecraft these days. You don't see them on the television. You don't see them on the radio, like they're not in the news. Imagine that, right? And then ask yourself these 3 questions. So I'm going to pop these 3 questions into the chat for everybody. But they are, how would it feel if you never saw people like you in the places that you go to every day? What if the only image you see of yourself is negative or stereotype? And what if the information that you got about yourself was just flat out incorrect? So when you go into your rooms, like, think about that and imagine, what would it be like? How would you feel? What would you be doing? Is there something you would do differently? Would you code switch? Meaning, would you show up one way to better fit in, or would you in one place and then turn into your authentic self when you felt safe? Or would you stick it with everything exactly as it is and just be yourself? Or maybe you don't know. Does that make sense? Okay, so Michael's going to send you to the rooms, and you guys go ahead and get started. Give me just 30 seconds to copy and paste this into the chat box so that you guys have them as a broadcast, okay?
You continue, right?
Who would like to spill the tea first? What did you guys decide? Oh, Michael.
So right before we came back, I was saying that, because Sedona was saying something like that she gives the same energy she's giving back, right? And sometimes it's that we was talking about that. I was talking with Johanna before we started this, is being self-aware, right? But at the same time, when we do bring something to the table and we don't get that reaction that we wanted, it's kind of hard, right, to keep trying to grab that attention from that audience. And it's kind of intimidating, especially if you don't get no reactions, right? Like, Johanna, you can come here and give us this whole spiel of this, right? And give us this knowledge. But if we just sit here and just look at you like, it's like intimidating, because you're like, am I saying the right thing? Are they getting it? Or do they even care? You know, and those things are like important. I think knowing this knowledge, right, is caring, because we're here to learn. I'm here to learn, right? I could listen, I'll be honest, I'm a Christian man, right? And there's a lot of people in my church that always got something negative to say. And I look at them and say, wow, yo, it's like, you're supposed to be full of love no matter what. You know, I got family members that identify with the LGBT community, right? And how can I say I love them, but then go to church and talk crap about them, right? Or talk behind their back? It's like, damn, I'm a hypocrite for that. If I'm saying that God loves everybody except y'all, like, that's not right. You know, and I always thought about that growing up, you know, and I want to be that type of person that I want to love everybody. I've been that person ever since I was small. I was the type of person that I walk into a room and my family members will go crazy. I came in like, oh, he's finally here. And they'll give me a hug. And my grandmother used to say that I loved her with nothing to look like. I loved her, but didn't want nothing back from her. I just loved, you know, and I don't want nothing from people, but that same love I'm giving.
I love that. Simple. Thank you. What else did you guys get from the groups?
Religion came up in ours too. You know, so that must be a trending topic, and it's very common. But like Patrick and Chris had some really interesting things to say. I was the listener.
We were talking. Thanks, Khalees. There, just throw the ball back at us. Appreciate it. No, but we were talking about the fact that, you know, I'm of an age and came out in a very, very different time, early 80s, right? Mm-hmm. And so and I went to a small college where I was sure I was the only gay person on campus, period. And that is a problem, you know, that's a problem, right? For me, as far as having, and that's why I think, Johanna, to your first question, why it's so important to have those kinds of role models and visible resources available. And I shared there was one resource on campus, which was the counseling center, where one of the counselors was affirming. But think about it for a second. If that's the only spot, that means you have to go to the counseling center where, you know, you're sick, okay? And then so that is, for me, that was really tough. And even in the 80s and 90s, in my young professional career in DC, I had to very much keep my sexual orientation in a professional setting completely closeted, right? And because I'd easily lose my job. That was, and now my experience of working, so I work at a Catholic university, and it's an open and affirming Catholic university, you know, based on our president and our vice president for mission and really all of the staff. But that comes, as Khalees alluded to, that comes laden with a lot of baggage. And the students that I have met with over the last couple of years, you know, sort of some of them, as they're trying to figure out their gender expression or their sexual orientation, are really dealing with stuff they heard in church, stuff they've heard from their family, stuff they hear from politicians, and they don't trust us, even as an open and affirming place, to really be open and affirming. And that's part of the challenge as we deal with young people, and then overlay that if there's anybody who's dealing with substance abuse problems, that sort of all comes into play. That part of it, and Nathan, to what you were saying earlier too, but part of it is we also have to be believed as an ally, believed. And so that's why it's important to do these trainings and to hear and to know and to learn. So sorry, I could keep going. I'll be quiet.
No, that was all really powerful. In fact, that's exactly what I was hoping would come from this, right? Is that even with our experiences, right? Like Patrick's telling us his experience, and Michael told us his experience, right? And Khalees is like, religion keeps coming up, that must be a thing, right? Like, so even with our experiences, being able to expand that so that we can see the person with us, right? That, and then be there for them, you know, like truly practicing empathy, not sympathy. Like, I don't feel bad for you. You know, I'm never going to feel bad for you. That is not helpful to you. And it is powerlessness for me, right? But I can feel with you and we can walk together. And if you want support, right, I can help you find it. If you don't want support and you want to sit, I can sit with you for as long as I'm able to, right? And so that empathy practice is really important, because along with the other piece that Patrick was talking about, right, is learning not just the resources, but what do we have to change? How much do we have to expand in order to create space where people who are like us, who have that double stigma of LGBT and addiction, that we can go someplace and be welcomed and affirmed and accepted exactly for who we are, without being led to believe or implied that we are crazy or in need of mental assistance, or that there's something wrong with our expression of ourselves, which actually might be a good time to say SOGI, right? So Chris put SOGI, SOGI into the chat below a little earlier, right? So SOGI SOGI is sexual orientation, gender identity. When we're in healthcare settings or when data is being collected, all that they're collecting is what is your sexual orientation, what is your gender identity, right? And then when we're in social settings or in coaching sessions, settings like we mostly are, right? It's SOGI, so it's SOGIE, so social, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So how I express myself, that's how I see myself. And then how you see and receive my expression of myself is about you, right? So, I mean, I can walk into a place and rock a suit and tie, right? And that suit and tie might mean something very different to me than it would mean to someone else who's also female-bodied walking into a place wearing a suit and tie, right? They might be two very different expressions, or they might be exactly the same expression with different meanings, right? And so when we get to know people better, we get to ask them, hey, tell me about, you know, how the way that you express yourself. What does it mean to you? How does it make you feel? Like, does it empower you? Like, or, you know, how does it empower you? Maybe that's a better word. How does it empower you? Right? Was that helpful? Cool. Love it. Was there anything? Oh, wait, we heard from two of the groups. We got one group that's missing. What did you guys come up with? You shy? That's okay, I'm shy too.
I will say, we also talked about tokenism somewhat. Like when I got into recovery and moved back home to my small town, like I was it. I'm the gay guy in the rooms, right? There was me and one other guy. Definitely in my fellowship, I was the only one. So what does that, you know, what does that mean? What does that do? You know, partly, you know, I love to be special. I'm special and different, right? Like I love to be special, but I hate to be different. So, you know, it gives me a special status, but also keeps me disengaged in some aspect, which is something I often battle with. But, and then how much of my own bias against me being gay in a room full of straight people, like what am I thinking? They're thinking about me all the time, you know, whether or not that's true or not. What am I putting on them that's really not fair if I'm not actually receiving that, right? Like I always go in a little cautious depending on my audience to some degree, you know. Half the time I don't even think about it. Sometimes it's very prevalent, just depending on my mood. So, but it's partly I moved back to Columbus was to be with a broader, with more of the LGBT community in recovery, you know. So, and dating options. There's not a lot back where I was from, so.
I feel you.
You are silly.
That's awesome. Yeah, well, thank you for bringing those up. I mean, those are really valid points. And those are the things that we think about. Because here's the thing, right? If it's in the chair, it's in the room, right? So if one person is thinking it, means multiple people are thinking it. In fact, so many people think it, there's terms for it: tokenism, projection, mind reading, right? Like, and we call them things in coaching too, like, hey, what are you putting on that person, right? So like, yeah, it's in the chair, it's in the room. Love this. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again and gonna drop some information to support, right? So let me see, PowerPoint slideshow. Okay, there we go. And let me share the, oh, now I can see many of you, not all of you, but many of you. Okay, so all of the things that you guys talked about, they're rooted someplace, right? They're not just stigma for stigma's sake. Just like alcoholism and drug addiction and substance use disorder and problematic drug use, like all of those, the stigma that comes from that is rooted in someplace, right? And so the most recent relevant stigma that applies to the LGBT community is because up until in the recovery community, right, is that up until the 1970s, many physicians and psychologists thought that homosexuality and alcoholism were linked. In fact, they thought if you could cure the alcoholism, that you would also cure the homosexuality. But today we know that's not true. And despite, we know that's not true, but in order for us to be able to understand why it's not true, we got to know some of the backstory, right? So this is a picture of the Stonewall Inn. The Stonewall Inn is the setting of one of many uprisings from the sexual orientation and gender identity minority groups, right? There were multiple uprisings from Compton's cafeteria to Stonewall. And Stonewall is the one that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, and it created the modern civil rights movement for the LGBT community. All of our rights right now came as a direct result of this experience, right? We can trace it back. So the reason that we have the Stonewall Inn is on this picture is because the Stonewall Inn was like many other places that we went to. In the early 1900s, it was absolutely illegal for LGBT people to gather in public. And so we would gather in bars. They were owned by the mafia, and they were regularly raided by police. And what that did is it gave us the ability to socialize and feel a sense of community. So all of the things that we talked about, you guys brought to the table, right? All the things that you guys brought to the table, this was how we solved it. We would go to these bars, and our patrons were the mafia, right? Dangerous, drug dealers, prohibitionists, right? Not prohibitionists, bootleggers. And then those bars are regularly raided by the police. And when they caught us, if we didn't have 2 or more articles of clothing that were meant for the gender meant for our sex that they perceived us to be, right? Or the sex assigned at birth, then they would arrest us. And when they arrested us, our names would be in the paper. We would lose our jobs and our homes and our families. And then we would go back to the bars, because that was the only place that we had community and the ability to be ourselves. And no one was telling us how messed up we were. So as you no doubt can figure out, right? Like addiction and other problematic drug use became a normal part of our culture. And so despite the lack of safety, those bars and clubs, they really provided us this place to gather and to socialize and to feel a part of. And so my question for you guys is, what do you think that must have been like for those folks to not have a safe space to socialize? What do you think?
Pretty rubbish.
Yeah.
Don't feel like you've got anywhere you belong, that you're safe, that you can enjoy life, that you can be with people like you. Yeah, like Khalees, just sad, really sad.
Yeah, 100%. Do you think that it would contribute do you think that if you already had a predilection to being depressed or to being to using drugs or alcohol problematically, do you think that it would encourage you to continue to do so? Yeah, I see a bunch of head nods. Yeah, heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. And there we go, feeling not worthy of connection, friends, relationships, and love. Yes, girl. You keep watching those documentaries because those documentaries will tell you all about the Mattachine Society and the Bilitis Society and the things that really gave us the power to be able to light this civil rights movement that we have. Yeah, all of these things, right? They contribute to drug addiction and alcoholism. And I know I'm using outdated terms, right? I'm partly using the outdated terms intentionally. And the reason is because we're talking about history, right? And so in order to talk about history, we need to hear a little bit of it kind of puts us in that place of feeling a little bit of the space when we can use those terms, right? Like, what was it like in 1930? What was it like in 1969? What was it like in 1973? What is it like today? Like, we have come so far into what Khalees said, we have so much further to go. So we know today that isolation is a key factor in addictive behavior. What you got, Patrick?
You and I are so much on the same wavelength, Johanna, because I was one of the changes from, you know, the heyday of the bars and the clubs and everything where people could gather in community is, you know, this and the apps and everything else that build on that isolation that you just talked about. So certainly what I hear in the rooms and in my coaching are people, and, you know, just overlay the pandemic for the last 2.5 years, people don't know how to make authentic connections anymore. Whether it is, you know, for, you know, a partner type thing or just as friends. And so to your point, that sense of isolation, I think absolutely drives the use of alcohol, drugs, because I'll speak from my own personal experience as well, you know, because that lubricated those opportunities to connect with people, right? Whether you were whether I'm doing drugs or alcohol in the bars, those things helped me feel comfortable with who I was and therefore comfortable with talking to you.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so keep that vein, right? Like, since we know that the antidote to addiction is connection, how can we help LGBT people connect? As recovery coaches, how can we help LGBT people to connect? Michael, and then Khalees.
I say just I always look back at that whole nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care, right? And just being curious to find out information and just ask the person the question, right? And then I think the best way to connect with people is asking questions, because then I think conversations will lead into relationships, right? And those relationships will lead into people being vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, you're able to just be free and just say whatever you feel that's in your heart, you know? So I think just caring, right, to know.
Love that. Thank you. Yes. What you got, Khalees?
I think mine's might be kind of similar to Michael's, but I was gonna say, like, because I've heard it previously and it was mentioned today about the tokenistic thing and like the attention, and like whenever I meet people, I treat them like a person, like the normal person. I show up as myself. You know, and I don't make people disclose information to me. Like but I'm a very people person too. Like, I could have a conversation with this wall right here, you know, and we're gonna have a great conversation, let me tell you. But whenever I do that, I've noticed whenever I show up and I'm also very curious. You know, we just talk and treat people like people. They open up to me and they end up disclosing what they want to. And then also for how I can create spaces, I guess, is like, I'm a big resource broker in our community. So if there's like connections, or I know people have synergy and they want to, you know, if there's 2 people in our community who want to do more for the LGBTQ community, like I'll connect them and like get them together and share resources and stuff. But I can do that as well as being a supporter, and then yeah, just sharing in safe spaces. I think safe spaces are really important, you know, from what we've been talking about today, like spaces where people can show up as themselves. People need to feel comfortable showing up as themselves, and I think that's a really big thing. And you know, Joanna, I think it was like the first LGBTQ training I did with you with CCAR, but you had showed a video where a girl went to the doctor, and it was like the paperwork and like all of that stuff, and I'm like, dude, every time I go see a paperwork in an office, you know, I think about that now. And it's like, I see that all the time, but like, it's things like that we can be doing to make it more inclusive and open for people.
Thank you for that. Yeah, all of those things. So like, if we think about how we ourselves can apply it, right? Like the things that Michael and Khalees just said, right? If we think about, how can I apply this? How can I make space for someone else? How can I connect them to the things that will support them? How can I improve our paperwork, right? How can I share like how awesome they are by showing up and being yourself? How can I be more free so that the people around me reflect their own freedom back to me? So let's talk about some pioneers. I love pioneers. So you guys may have heard of Marty Mann. Yeah, lots of people hear about Marty Mann. Yet, ooh, Michael, that's a great question. How can I advocate for those that feel like they have no voice? Yes. Yes. And so like, oh, I love that. Okay, so despite so many of us, right, not having that voice, we've still played a significant role in the recovery movements. Like Marty Mann, she is someone that has touched all of our lives. She's the second woman mentioned in the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous who got into recovery, who got sober, right? But more than that, if you have ever seen a series of news videos from the 1950s during the recovery advocacy movement, then that is her work. She helped to make that possible. She was an early recovery advocate. She promoted public education about the disease of alcoholism and founded what we now call the National Council on Alcohol and Drug Dependence. And she was a lesbian. She was also responsible for ushering gay men and lesbians into Alcoholics Anonymous in the 1940s and 50s. In fact, Mrs. Mann and her partner, Priscilla P., helped to establish the AA Grapevine magazine. So that magazine and the National Council on Alcohol and Drug Dependence, which we call NCADD, that is the group that she founded. So if you were part of Facing Addiction and the Unite to Fight Addiction rally and the concert in Washington, D.C. in 2015-16, then you have been touched by Mrs. Mann's work. Mrs. Mann was not only a mover and a shaker and a doer, she was an early proponent of treating substance use disorders as a public health issue, right? And I said substance use disorders, all of them, right? Opioid, narcotics, alcohol, as the public health issue that it actually is. And she recognized that substance use disorders are a disease and not a moral failing. So that's huge, right? And then we've got this guy, Barry Leach. We don't like this is, I know that's not the best picture, but it's the best one that we could find. He's a true pioneer too. He was one of the most influential gay AA speakers of all time. He wrote the book Living Sober. So if you've ever seen that book, that is his authorship. And Mr. Leach gathered the information for the book by asking for input from many AA members who had long-term sobriety. It describes methods for staying sober that were developed by the AA members. Mr. Leach also wrote AA conference approved pamphlet. I believe it's P13, and it's called Do You Think You're Different? And it was geared, I say it was geared, but really it was a compilation of stories of AA members who felt different, even inside of AA. So African American, Native American, atheist, members of the clergy, high bottom, low bottom, Jewish, lesbian, gay, old, young, and agnostic were all part of this document, right? So again, Mr. Leach is making a big impact onto what would come next, right? Like, how do we get the Black and brown community involved in recovery and help them just as much as we're helping the white communities, right? And so he had a big part to do in that. And then we've got Nancy Tucker. So Nancy T, she has a lot of things, just like Mrs. Mann, she's got a lot of things under her belt that she did, right? So the first thing that she did is she compiled a list by making phone calls all throughout the nation of gay sober meetings, right? She was looking to find and identify those meetings. And because there was no list available, and because she traveled a lot for work, she would call ahead to the local AA office and try to find a recovery meeting for LGBT people. She added to the list, and she created the very first gay directory for AA meetings. And this directory didn't happen because the GSO, how do I say this? It didn't exist in reality, like wasn't handed out, because the GSOs were not at the time letting groups identify as gay meetings. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit because it's important. But what she did do is she published a pamphlet called The Homosexual Alcoholic, AA's Message of Hope to Gay Men and Women. And she sent that pamphlet to the General Service Office, or the GSO, for them to mail out, which they did. You know, they did it quite often, actually, when people with differing sexual orientation and gender identities would call into the office. But getting it approved would take years, and she hung in there until it was approved. So Nancy eventually took the document, the pamphlet, to Hazelden, and in 1980, the rights to the pamphlet were sold to them to make en masse. So she got that information out. And in 1979, she helped found the National Association of Lesbian and Gay Addiction Professionals, which we also know as NALP, NALGP. And then, you know, like, if you have any peripheral experience with the 12-step programs, you've probably heard of the third tradition. So the history of gay and trans membership in AA goes back to at least 1937. And it turns out that the story that helped develop the third tradition was about a gay man, a trans person, seeking help for not only for their alcoholism, but also for substance use. And he walked into an AA clubhouse. He asked if he could join, but he apologized and said, I have a double dose of stigma. I'm both a drunk and I'm gay. And I still want to come. Will you have me? This is how far we've come. And AA voted unanimously to let him join that group, and then followed through on the commitment. This gives me chills every time I say it, but they followed through on that commitment by creating the third tradition, that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. If it wasn't for this story combined with another one of a person who was struggling with heroin addiction, wanting to come to AA, but having that dual stigma, we would not have the third tradition. So being inclusive really means that everyone benefits. And then, you know, like because of that work, it created LGBT plus sober groups, right? And those groups were just as much for recovery as they were for socializing. And not everybody that belonged to these sober groups were members of 12-step organizations. Sometimes they just showed up to be part of the recovery movement for themselves, right? And they also showed up to socialize in safe, sober ways. This provided not only support, but it provided opportunities to gather for social interaction and enjoyment that was focused on recovery. And they included all of these groups that you see, right? Fire Island meetings, Boston meetings, San Francisco, all throughout the country. And there's many, many more too. So the good news is that the work of Nancy T and the work that was happening in these LGBT sober groups, what happened is that it developed this network of advocates, and they pioneered what we now call the current network of gay AA or gala meetings across the country. And I know that it sounds really exclusionary, right? And that it's just gala, right? Gay and lesbian Alcoholics Anonymous, but really it's quite inclusionary, and it includes people from the entire spectrum, everyone that falls underneath the umbrella of sexual orientation and gender identity minorities. And until recently, and I say like recently in the last 20 to 30 years, the trans community was folded into as a silent member of the gay and lesbian and bisexual communities, right? And so like as all of us get more freedom, right, we're able to start expanding our definitions of who's welcome, right? And so we're able to be more inclusive of everybody under the umbrella, which is how we got that really big acronym name, right? So what this has done is it's created this strong, sober, queer community that's really a subset of the larger sober community. And that's also created an overall acceptance of the queer experience in many mainstream factions in various recovery settings across the culture in general. The last thing I'll say about that is that following the decision to create the gala meetings, the general service offices of Alcoholics Anonymous voted to allow LGBT plus sober groups to be able to identify as gay meetings in meeting directories like the AA World Directory. So anytime you see a meeting that says women's meeting or men's meeting or Jewish meeting, that is because of the work that was done by LGBT members of Alcoholics Anonymous. We've done a lot of stuff. And then, you know, like, remember what I said at the very beginning? When I asked the question, we did the thought experiment, we went out, right? I wrapped that whole thing up, and I said that up until the 1970s, many physicians and psychologists thought that homosexuality and alcoholism were linked. And they actually thought that if you could cure the alcoholism, that you could also cure the homosexuality. Well, it turns out that the doctors were wrong. And in 1973, the DSM-2, which I know is a diagnostic manual, and it's not typically something we would talk about inside of a recovery coaching thing, but it's relevant, right? Because that diagnosis combined with religious stigma and persecution was what created the massive problem with LGBT community and our own government, right? And the governments around the world. So them saying that they were wrong and removing homosexuality as a mental disorder by the American Psychological Association was massive, because it meant that there was the ability for us to gain our civil rights, for us to be accepted as full member, one day to be accepted as full members of the community. And it meant that we could do things like this, right? So in 2019, the APA, the American Psychological Association, issued a formal apology, an apology for the damage caused by their theory. Yeah, this is pretty significant, right? So we've talked about our history of it, and we've talked about the double stigma that we carry, but even more than just what we carry, but what we carry when we combine it with addiction. And we've talked about the legacy that we carry of fighting for both our recovery and the right to be ourselves authentically that continues to this day, right? To this day. So the thing that we encourage, like I encourage, is that you take some time to look up some LGBT resources in your local area. In fact, you may already know of some, right? And then I encourage you to do your due diligence on those places that you know, right? Are they places that you would send someone that you love? And if you don't know of any resources, find some and ask around until you locate them. Can someone do me a favor and read that quote on the screen?
Here I go. Each group had to establish itself within a larger heterosexual community, regardless of how large or small or dangerous or loving that community was. Audrey Borden, The History of Gay People in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Thank you. So even though this was meant to be like how we developed, right, inside of AA, it's also the greater story of how we develop in other places, right? How many of you guys, I'm going to open up my screen a little bit more so I can see your actual hands raised. I had my little chat box here. How many of you guys know of LGBT services that exist at a treatment center today? Yeah, a lot of people know them, right? And this is an example of that, right? Like this quote, each group had to establish itself within a larger heterosexual community, regardless of how large or small or dangerous or loving that community was. That is still happening today. And so maybe the resources that you find are not resources that are like, I'll throw out Wildwood, right? Wildwood is in Connecticut. Many of you guys are in Connecticut, and it is 100% dedicated to LGBT people, right? All of us, whether we're bisexual or pansexual or transgender or gender non-conforming or something else, right? Asexual, agender, they treat all of us. Groups like them are growing more and more, like there's more and more of them every year, but they're starting right inside of organizations like maybe CCAR, CCAR doing this training right here and all the trainees that came up to it. This could be the start of something at CCAR, right? Starting inside of an already established program. So if you don't see any, I say that to say, if you don't see any resources that are like, this is 100% solely for the LGBT community, maybe there's something smaller wrapped up inside it, and inside something bigger. Is that helpful? Cool. So I do have a phone number for you guys because, there's a lot of research that goes into, there's a tremendous amount of research that goes into telling history stories like this and webinars like this one. There's also a tremendous amount of research and due diligence that goes into developing an LGBT QIA plus resource list. And many of the times it starts with learning from you guys. So this number here is a text line. So it's just for a texting, right? So if you text your LGBT stories or your great queer resources to us, we'll check them out, we'll verify them, and then, we love to spread the word about who's doing good work and share what they're doing well. So we'll like share that stuff. So please feel free to text us and give us that information. We'd love to hear it. We'd love to know about it. Khalees, what you got?
Sorry, I was laughing. I was just thinking about Kim Possible. Call me, beat me if you want to reach me. Kim Possible, early 90s. Yeah. Anyways, I just have a question because you're talking about resources and stuff. I know that y'all are in the US, but do you have like a resource list, any resources in the UK or other countries that we could share with our communities?
Yeah, I think yes, and
outside, because we have, just outside of the US, do you have resources outside of y'all at all?
Yeah, 100%. We do have some resources outside of the US. So I would encourage you to, we can put together a list and get them to you guys. And B is that look at Sydney, Australia World Pride.
Okay.
You can, that's happening this year. It's happening in February. So there's going to be a lot of organizations that are rooted all throughout the world that can support. And then there is an organization called, I believe it's called Stonewall. I'll double check it. It's in London.
Oh, I think you might have mentioned that, Stonewall. And then we have, because we have the Londoner, which that guy's amazing that started the Londoner and stuff like that. But I'm just trying to, gather resources. So yeah, anything would be helpful.
Heck yeah. Dude, that's something that we can collaborate on too.
I think, and that's what I'm realizing too, is people don't know what they don't know, so if we say, hey, here are some resources if you want to explore that, then that we're giving people tools. And even if they don't do it, maybe they're like, actually, I remember I saw this resource somewhere, and they pass it on to somebody else.
Heck yeah. Thank you. Patrick, what you got?
Another resource, and this is Khalees, and also is, and I think I mentioned this in the June session, is Crystal Meth Anonymous. So crystalmeth.org is the international website which lists all of the meetings around the world that take place. And, one of the things that obviously we didn't touch on so much here, but I think building out of a lot of the things we talked about is that crystal meth is a drug that is unfortunately very prevalent within the gay community. Depending on where you are in the country, sometimes it's sort of thought of as a rural drug and that kind of thing, but it is unfortunately, especially in the big cities, all too prevalent. And crystalmeth.org and Crystal Meth Anonymous meetings can be a really good resource for your clients if that is one of the drugs they've used, whether it's their primary addiction or not, but it's an opportunity there to connect with a lot of other people. So for example, during the pandemic, when we all went to Zoom, our little Connecticut meetings kept getting all of these guys in from London. It was really amazing that, and from around the world. But I just wanted to put that out there as a opportunity too for resources.
I'm popping that into the chat box. Thank you so much. Awesome. So I know that we're bumping right up on time, and I want to say thank you guys. Thank you for continuing to come. Thank you, folks. Thank you for continuing to come. Thank you for continuing, asking excellent questions like this, right? And for showing up and participating. It really matters. I can only speak for myself, and I can imagine what other people are thinking, right? Because if it's in the chair, it's in the room. To me, seeing the number, all of you guys, says to me that a year down the road, my life is going to be easier, and that not only will my life be easier, but so will all of the other queer people that I know, right? And it's incremental change. It's literally the stacking effect. That incremental change means that one day we won't have conversations like this. In fact, we'll be going, remember when we had conversations like that? And that's what we're really aiming for, right? So thank you guys. And I can't wait to hear what you tell us about how you guys are impacting your sober communities, your recovery communities in your area. You're welcome. Yeah, so Margaret, you can text me at that number, and that is the easiest way to reach me. I'm glad you asked. You're welcome. Thank you. Yay! Michael, what do we do to wrap up?
Just wave. Nah,
I just have one quick question before you go. I just have one quick question. So this is going to be a challenging question. Say, for example, you have someone who is challenging a little bit, not as open-minded as myself. How could you encourage somebody to learn more about how they can support the LGBTQ plus community?
What do you guys think? Love that question. How would you handle that?
Are you asking me in particular? Because I just asked you.
Yeah, no, I'm asking the group.
I would say we had that conversation, right, Johanna? That somebody asked me something like that, and I said, hey, make as much noise as you can. Because when you make noise, you change, you grab people's attention when you do that. And you're not gonna change everybody, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink water, right? But just keep making noise.
I like to start talking to the people and find out where their challenges have been with how people have treated them, as a way to be like, oh, well, and I feel like you're kind of doing that with the gay people. Or whatever, you know what I mean? Or metaphors. I'm a big metaphor person, so I always use metaphors for everything.
Those are excellent ways. Does anybody else have one?
I was just asking out of curiosity, just to hear while I'm in a room of experts, and we're talking about the subject, why not throw that one out there really quick?
Yeah, I'm glad you did. That was amazing.
And that's it, folks. We can all go now.
Okay. Thank you guys for hanging out with me today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. See you
Yes.
next time.
Bye, y'all.